We live in a country where politicians are more afraid of voters than voters are of politicians. That's how we want it. That feels filthier. That feels like a grosser part of rock and roll, but not what I think. And you know that.
Over to you, Chris.
Like, I don't know.
What if he's still around?
Cool story, comma, bro.
Which presidential pollster is Galluping away from history? Let's find out on Whole Hog Politics. See what I did there? Welcome, everyone. I'm Bill Sammon, joined by my old pal, Chris Stirewalt. We both work at the Hill and News Nation, but only you, Chris, are the author of Whole Hog Politics, the must-read political newsletter published each week at thehill.com. Data nerds despair. Chris, that could have been the headline this week when we learned that Gallup, the polling organization, is no longer going to poll for presidential approval. Now, they've been doing presidential approval polls for 88 years, which is, I looked this up, it's 37% of the time that we've had presidents in this country, okay? And the reason that's important is because Gallup has been doing this for so much longer than any polling organization that, you know, say what you will about Gallup's numbers, it was the only one that gave us the historical context to be able to compare presidents throughout history. We're talking about 15 different presidents, obviously in modern history. I don't think Gallup polled Abraham Lincoln, but it's a shame that it's a shame that they're not doing it anymore. And I want to get into, Chris, with you, the reason that may or may not have been behind this, and I guess we can only speculate. But before we do that, let me just hit you with a couple of because this allowed me, when I figured we're not going to be able to do this much longer, I went through the data of the presidential polling, and I just kind of ran some tables and such. So I'm going to ask you three questions, three trivia questions. First one is this: name any of the three least popular presidents as measured by average approval ratings over the totality of their presidencies. Any of the three least popular presidents. I'm not talking about like a poll that had one snapshot here or one snap. I'm talking about an average of their whole presidency.
Oh, the average of the whole presidency.
Of their presidency.
Oh.
Yeah. Because I'll get into the snapshots after this question, but I want to take an average sounding first. The three least popular presidents in a general sense, as
where their average approval. Now, look, before you had your big wind up, you have your big question, and that's fine. And I'm going to answer your question, but how are you going to do this and not acknowledge that you have a tan and that it's been a week and that we're all here, Bill, pale? They're just barely getting rid of the snow.
I went down,
and you look like Nixon at San Clemente. And explain yourself.
Listen, man, I admit I went. My wife and daughter, we went down for 3 days to Cancun. Now, I've never been to Cancun, and usually when I do the rare like winter getaway thing, I usually pick the 1 week where it's 65 degrees, weirdly heat spell back home, and it doesn't. And it's only 5 degrees warmer where I went, but that was not the case this time. It was frigid here in Washington, and I had 80-degree weather in Cancun, so it was great. But
we've addressed that. I'm satisfied. The internet's satisfied. But so I was, before you told me it was average, I was going to say that George W. Bush would have to be on the list because the end of George W. Bush's presidency registered a bunch of numbers in the 20s. But average, I mean, what are you going to say? Carter, Ford, and I'll go Carter, Ford, Biden.
You got Biden correct. Carter was fourth on the list of least popular. Can we put up the graphic, if we have it, that shows average approval ratings? The lowest is Donald Trump.
You salmonized it. That's what you did.
1.1. And then Joe Biden, 42.2. And then Harry Truman, 45.4. Of course, the highest approval ratings, and I guess I should have waited to put the screen up, but I blew it. But those, I was going to ask you what you thought the highest average approval ratings, but there's the answer there for you. JFK, Ike, and Papa Bush.
JFK, sadly, only had two-thirds or 3/4 of a term.
Yeah.
Less than 3/4 of a term. And so he got the honeymoon and that stuff. George H.W. Bush, that average reflects that he finished in the 30s. So think about how high George H.W. Bush's numbers were because if he finished in the 30s. So George H.W. Bush, and I'm not looking at the numbers, but George H.W. Bush finished 40%, fairly commensurate to where President Biden, President Trump, like in those numbers when he lost. He had a little bounce at the end.
Yeah.
If I'm recalling correctly. So think about how high George H.W. Bush's numbers were when the United States won the Cold War and engaged in the first successful use of force sanctioned by the United Nations since Korea, if you consider Korea a successful use of force. George H.W. Bush did something that nobody had done in, 50 years, and put this big exclamation point at the end of the Cold War, said, not only are we going to manage the collapse of the Soviet Empire, but we're going to flex too. We're going to go out and we're going to get this coalition together and expel Saddam Hussein. And 10 minutes later, practically speaking, historically speaking, the American public said, yeah, but what have you done for me lately?
Yeah,
bro.
So like with Churchill, wins World War II essentially, and then they threw him out of Parliament not too much longer later than that.
And the thing about George H.W. Bush, I've studied that it's useful because we have modern kind of polling for that presidency, and the modern media landscape had not formed fully with the internet, but it was, we were definitely deep in the era of mass communication. And looking at how George H.W. Bush's reelection fell apart is a great example. It's a wonderful exemplar for how what goes wrong and how you lose. And George H.W. Bush lost because Ross Perot. He lost because Bill Clinton was a supreme talent that came out of nowhere, relatively speaking.
He lost because and I remember this very, very well. He lost in large part because of sort of what's going on in recent history, which is to say, you had a president that was coming out of an economic slump, and and the data, and you and I have talked about this many times. The data showed that we were technically out of the recession,
but voters had made up their
several quarters of GDP, but it was like, tell that to the guy that can't pay his bills. All the anecdotal stuff was thrown at him, and he couldn't punch through that. And I think the press was against him. And of course, as soon as he won, as soon as Clinton won, and before he was inaugurated, I swear to God, I wish I had clipped this story. There was an article in one of them big papers that said, Clinton's not even, in office yet, and the economy seems to be responding to his election. It seems to be turning around.
Don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you got till it's gone?
Yes. Let me put up. You've already answered my final trivia question, so I'm going to put it up on the screen if we can, and I want to show you the second thing I looked at, which was the highest approval ratings and lowest approval ratings when it comes to individual snapshots within the presidency. And what I was fascinated by was that both George W. Bush and Harry Truman had among the highest approval ratings and also the lowest approval ratings. So if you look at the spread, which is another fascinating statistic, and I know I'm a total dork on this stuff, but the spread on those two presidents was 65 points. Okay, yep. I meant to do this. Somebody will do this. a spread that showed the narrowest, because some of these, if you look at the charts, some of these presidents operate in a very narrow bandwidth where it doesn't really go up or down that much over the course of their presidency, and others have real peaks and valleys. And certainly you see that with George W. Bush, Harry Truman. Obviously, George W. Bush had the highest ever Gallup presidential approval rating right after 9/11 with a 90%. His dad, right after the Gulf War, 89%. Harry Truman, and I didn't put this in the table, but it lists the months of all of these things. That was June 1945, no surprise, coming out of WW2. And then if you look at Nixon on the lowest, obviously that was the July and August of 1974.
So first of all, I believe, I hope anyway, that there is still a bar in the Elm Terrace neighborhood of Elm Grove, West Virginia, called Storm and Norman's. The fever for the Gulf War it's young people today cannot appreciate how excited Americans were that we had exercised the Vietnam syndrome. We had done it.
We won one.
We won one, and we showed that it could be done. And of course, history is just the story of the great relearning, right? You learn the lesson, and then you forget it immediately. You begin to forget it immediately, and then 20 years later, you do it again. Welcome to inflation. Hey, what if we just juiced the currency supply wildly to avoid recessions while engaging in running trillion-dollar deficits? And the answer is like, oh, you'll get stubborn inflation that people don't like. I do think a lesson from George H.W. Bush, a lesson from Harry Truman is people ultimately don't vote on foreign policy very much. They will in the moment. And this is true for George W. Bush. That was a rally around the flag when the United States had been attacked in the most successful, most diabolical terrorist attack ever, the first attack on U.S. soil, large-scale attack on U.S. soil since Pearl Harbor. And the country rallied around George W. Bush and forgave him as much as his critics wanted to say, yeah, but where was Cheney and who did this and blah, 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 blah. And people said, shut up. We got to just stick with our guy. He's got the right attitude about this. We're going to work it out. How far he fell, because there's no bank, right? It's like your relationship. It's like your personal relationships, unhealthy personal relationships. There's no bank. You can do all the good in the world for a friend, and that person is like, yeah, well, that's over, right? You're just, that doesn't count for
What
anything.
have you done for me lately?
Yeah, what have you done for me lately? So there's no bank. That's one lesson. Two.
Well, by the way, I will just say this. I actually had a chance to ask President George W. Bush while he was president about that very topic. I actually, and it was a very cynical question. I asked him, I said, look, you had these crazy high approval ratings and in your first term, and, presidents only have a certain amount of political capital to spend, especially when they're thinking about obviously running for a second term.
He was loving this.
And I said, you timed this down, like you spent that capital on not only Afghanistan, but then Iraq, Afghanistan was like, everybody was like, yeah, of course we have to go into Afghanistan. Iraq, not so much. And that was a controversial, obviously, decision to go into Iraq. And as we got towards his reelection, you could see his numbers down, down, down. And then he squeaks to victory.
Not dissimilar from Barack Obama.
Over John Kerry. And I thought, so when I framed it to him that way, I said, boy, you timed this beautifully. You used up just all the political capital you could possibly use up, and you got back in for another 4 years. And he was like, Bill, that's not the way I look at this. I did what's right for the American public, but it was interesting to look at it through that cynical prism.
So you have a tan and you interview a bunch of presidents and write best-selling books about it. We got it, Bill.
It's a burden.
We understand. We understand.
Being me.
We understand. So lesson one, foreign policy victories don't last because Americans don't vote predominantly on foreign policy. So then the sort of Marxian view would hold the only thing that matters is the economy. And that's not true either. so the economy, and we keep getting numbers. We have economists are so surprised they're going to have to go take a nap, right? The numbers, like, oh, look at those employment numbers. The Peter Navarro went on television to say these jobs numbers are going to be trash. Don't believe what you see. It's because we're deporting all these people. And then the jobs number comes in. And it's like, okay, last year's jobs number, they got revised down to a pretty garbagey number. But this most recent report, it was like, well, what were you worried about? And obviously, that tells me even in the administration, they think that the economy is in trouble because they're trying to brace people for bad jobs numbers. Jobs number was fine. Okay, how's inflation? Well, it's actually continues to cool. Apparently, it's continues to cool down. And there's a story that you could tell if you were a Republican that would be about, that recession everybody said was coming. It's not here. The inflation is easing. This is actually happening. There's
a lot of signs that the economy, and it's not getting much attention, but
I wonder why. Well, I wonder why
the economy is kind of, and especially since we all thought that the tariffs would destroy everything, and I certainly thought that, and it just hasn't happened.
So the interesting thing about the tariffs, just as an aside on this is another expectations game thing. In April of last year, Donald Trump said, I hereby unilaterally destroy the American economy. And people said, what? We're doubling the price of goods from China and all of that stuff. And so the market, consumers and employers and everybody said, batten down the hatches, brace yourself for disaster. And then you know what the president did? I think the effective tariff rate, the import tax for goods coming into the United States, if you flatten it all out, is like 17%, which is higher than economists would like it to be. But it's not that high because the president treats the tariffs like neckties, right? It's on today. I don't like you, so I'm going to wear this one. You don't like that, so I do like you, and so I'm going to drop it. And the fact that the president did not deliver on the promise of last April. So the way that the tariffs have worked is that he didn't impose them, or at least not the way that he said he would. Long way of saying, if it was the famous James Carville line, speaking of the 1992 election, if it was just the economy stupid, the president wouldn't have Donald Trump's numbers. This was in the most recent Associated Press National Opinion Research Center poll. So there's job approval and then there's favorability, which are two different things. Gallup has been measuring job approval, which is how do you think he's doing?
Yeah.
And then there's favorability, which is, do you like this person? Do you have a good feeling about this person? And usually the gap is, so you talk about Bush, you talk about Obama. Bush and Obama won re-election because even when their job approval numbers were low, bad, relatively speaking, for somebody seeking re-election, people still felt better about them. I don't like how he's doing it, but I like him as a person. I feel good about him as a person, which, by the way, is a lot easier if the other party nominates somebody from Massachusetts that looks like they could also use a trip to Cancun. That tends to be helpful. But if you look at Donald Trump's favorability, and I'm going to pull up the Whole Hog Politics note right now so that I can say it correctly.
It's like 40 average, that's the job approval.
So I want to talk about the gap, and the gap is, and I now have to say more words because I touched the wrong email. The gap, well, that's how far he's underwater. So he's way underwater. He's 18 points underwater. But this is interesting. So on the favorability, right? He's at 34% favorability. So he's 6 or 7 points lower on people liking him than he is on job performance, which is to say there are a significant number of Americans who say, and this is always Donald Trump's problem, I'm okay with how he's doing, but I really dislike this person himself. It's a personal, the fact that his favorability is lower than his job performance is a very dangerous gap for Republicans. And I pointed out in the note, This is as low of a personal assessment that people have had about Donald Trump, the man, since the end of January in 2021, right after January 6th. And
Yeah.
so the explanation for why isn't, if you look at the election in a Carvillian way and say, as long as people are rich, as long as people feel like the job market's good, as long as take-home pay is going up, they don't care about anything. That's true up until a point. And what Donald Trump has done, and you see him pulling back in a lot of ways now, but what Donald Trump has done in a lot of ways is to say to the American electorate, I dare you, right? I dare you to like this. I dare you to approve.
Yeah.
And that's the gap on the other side.
Chris, I want to ask you about, speaking of polling, you also touched on, and by the way, your newsletter, Whole Hog Politics, is really is must read. And if we have a graphic, I want to put it up that has a QR code that you can scan.
Oh, look at that.
And you can get the newsletter for free and read it there at thehill.com. But one of the things you took note of in today's Whole Hog Politics newsletter was a new Pew Research poll on the media. And the takeaway was that a majority of Americans, 57%, express low confidence in journalists to act in the best interests of the public. Now, but there was also another stat that you had in there that I found even more fascinating, because it broke it down by Democrats and Democratic leaners versus Republicans and Republican leaners. And they asked those two groups, do you have confidence in that the media has the best interest of the public at heart? And Democrats said yes by a margin of 61%. Republicans said no, 25%, an enormous gap in Democrats and Republicans in who believes in the media or who thinks they've got the best interest at heart, their best interest at heart. My question to you, Chris, why do Democrats trust the media so much more than Republicans?
Well, I mean, there's the snarky answer would be because they are Democrats. If you wanted to, so if you answer,
but is that the true answer?
Well,
it may be some things are snarky and true.
Well, it's kind of true, right? There's truth in it. The truth is, and we know all the surveys that are taken where they ask people who work in journalism. I can't reach a copy of Broken News right now, but if I could, I would
that I blurbed for.
Imagine the plug. But you look at the data, the bias is real in the sense that 85% or whatever, and these things are hard to. These surveys are hard to do because you have a response rate problem. Because I would never participate in a survey that asked me to talk anything about my politics or feelings or whatever as a journalist. I don't think that's the right thing to do. But it's mostly left of center, right? Yeah. And when I say mostly, and there are a lot of
overwhelmingly, I would say.
Yeah, there's a lot
legacy media.
There's a lot of reasons why that's true. It has to do with selection bias on the part of who's hiring, and it has to do with selection bias on who wants these jobs. It has to do with gender. Women tend to be more drawn to communication fields than men. So, you can look at all of the crosstabs of who goes into the business.
And I'll give you one more data point that actually goes hand in hand, now that I think about it, with this data point, which is, why do Democrats trust the media more? When the Washington Post recently laid off a whole bunch of its reporters, 300 or more, it was very interesting to me to watch the reaction to it. Obviously, and look, obviously you and I are old newspaper guys, print guys. We hate to see any newspaper, regardless of its politics, fall on hard times. And we hate to see any reporters lose their jobs. But it was interesting, the reaction, the political reaction, because Democrats, elected Democrats, came out and criticized this. And we even had a story in the Hill about Democrats criticized Jeff Bezos, the owner, for doing this, but Republicans didn't. And I thought to myself, why would we? Why? I mean, I understand.
I bet they didn't.
It's funny, but it's also like empirically, why is that? Why do
Republicans have criticized the Washington Post every day for the past 75 years?
Well, but I mean, it goes to the point of this poll, which is to say, Republicans don't believe the media is on the level. Democrats do. And as you say, maybe because a lot of them are Democrats.
Well, so look, so the first part that you have to address is the bias part. And this is the part of the answer that makes Republicans feel the best, right? Well, of course, people don't believe the media because the media lies and they lie about Republicans and blah, it's rigged, blah, 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 blah. So that's the part of the answer that it is comforting to Republicans, and for Democrats should be disquieting, right? It should be, if you're a grown up and you're a Democrat and you're looking at the story of media bias, own it, right? Especially as a historical basis, looking back over the broad consensus of the period, let's say 1941 to 1996, right? There was a consensus. It was a center-left broad consensus in the old 3-network major newspaper dominated space. And that's a fact. And it's also a fact that in the prestige publications and locations, the skew among who works in the newsroom is going to, not on purpose, but inherently be biased. That's just how it is. And so if you're a Democrat, you should look at that and you should say, okay, I shouldn't be getting high on my own supply. I should look and say, all right, like take this with a grain of salt if I like the home cooking too much. If you're a Republican, the part that should be disquieting to you is, the old joke about what you do with your political base is that you treat them like mushrooms.
Yeah.
You keep them in the dark and you cover them with horse manure.
Yeah.
And what has happened for Republicans, and this is something that is a problem for the country, and it's certainly a problem for the Republican Party, which is the base core Republican electorate, which is predominantly white people who don't have college degrees, working class white voters. This group of people hates the media. And if you're a Republican, you may say deservedly so. That's fine. I would counter by saying, what media? There is legacy this, legacy that.
Yeah. And then you could talk about the alternative voices that
right.
come into the mix.
But I'll shut up by saying this. If you have a bunch of people who are not good consumers of news, and there are problems with the way Democrats consume news, but the Republicans have a bigger problem about consuming news and information. You won't be a good citizen if you do not consume a healthy diet of news and information. And what is happening in the Republican Party is very frequently, and this will be put to the test. In Texas, we'll have a good test in the Senate race down there.
Yeah.
Jasmine Crockett, the congresswoman from Texas, is empirically the wrong choice for Democrat, just as a question of what is the most correct choice for Democrats. It's not Jasmine Crockett, and it's not because she's a Black woman, as she and her supporters say. It's because she's too much, right? She's radical. She's wild. She gets in people's faces. She's a flame warrior. That's not the kind of Democrat that Texas, which has like an 8-point Republican lean, is going to go for.
But let me ask you this, because you've anticipated one of my next questions, because you, in your note today, you took note of the latest polling in the Texas Senate race, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side. I believe it was from the Houston Chronicle, I think.
No, it's from the University of Houston. It's not a poll that I'm in love with, but there's scant
but it's a data point.
point.
And here's my takeaway. On the Democratic side, as you point out, Jasmine Crockett, who's this flamethrower and may not be the best general election candidate for the Democrats, was ahead of her nearest competitor, James Tallarico, by 47% to 39%. So I guess an 8-point lead. And
there's plenty of undecided there. There's
plenty of undecided. But then on the other side, what's fascinating about this poll is that they also polled the Republican side. And lo and behold, it's the flamethrower on the right, Ken Paxton, who is ahead of the more moderate on the right, John Cornyn, the incumbent senator, by 7 points, 38 to 31. So what you have now is, not only do you have maybe not the best candidate on the Democratic side from the Democratic perspective for a general election, and then you also have the flamethrower on the right, for lack of a better term, or the problematic flamethrower And so that becomes, because it's easy to do the calculation if one of these two emerges out of the primary, and then they face the moderate on the other side. But if both of the flamethrowers, how does that? Where do we go with that? Who wins that race?
So this is the mushrooms problem, right? So if you're a so James Tallarico has not proven to be great at running for this office. He is.
What did he say? God is non-binary.
Well, there's that part, but there's the accidentally
well in Texas.
There's accidentally stumbling into a racially charged feud with Colin Allred, and he's inexperienced, and he may not go the distance. But if you're a Democrat, of course, the problem with Jasmine Crockett is if she gets the nomination, especially if Ken Paxton ends up winning the Republican race,
right?
She'll just be a problem. Jasmine Crockett she'll soak up a bunch of money. She'll cause problems for Democrats in other races. Tallarico probably won't win, but he might, and he is less likely to do serious damage to Democrats running down ballot in Texas and even to Senate candidates in other places. So here's the Dunning-Kruger test for Texas Republicans and Texas Democrats. Dunning-Kruger effect: the less I know about something, the more strongly I hold my opinion. The more I get to know, the more humility I am likely to have about what's going on. So if you don't know anything, right? If you are there and say, I don't know, I'm not looking at these polls, I'm not reading any analysis, I don't understand how normal people might receive Ken Paxton, who is a wildly bad choice for Texas Republic. It's just it's political malpractice if Texas Republicans take a safe seat that they have with John Cornyn and say, no, I demand a weaker candidate. I demand somebody who has a history of personal scandal. I demand somebody who has unpopular opinions. I demand a bad candidate. And same for Democrats. So this is where we used to use the term low information voter. And low information voters are not a problem. They're not that much of a problem. Bad information, limited information voters who are closed off, that's a problem. So Democrats need to be honest with themselves about recognizing the bias as it exists in a lot of mainstream coverage and a lot of legacy media coverage. They need to put the pipe down and read and go places where they're going to be challenged, and they're going to see fair coverage, and they're going to see and hear things that maybe they don't agree with. That's good. Democrats need to do that more. But what Republicans have done, many Republicans have done, is absent them from the experience of self-governance by just saying, I'm not consuming anything unless it tells me what I want to hear, unless it strokes my every erogenous zone of my brain.
Well, and some Democrats are doing that too, though.
Well, and Jasmine Crockett is evidence of that. But if we're talking about the larger problems, it's that Democrats like it too much, and Republicans are increasingly refusing to engage with the news, and that has bad implications for the country.
Chris, before we run out of time, I want to ask you one other topic. There was a big piece in the New York Times this week about fundraising.
Yes, you sent that to me.
Yeah, I sent it to you because I was so intrigued by it. It talked about, without getting into too many numbers, it basically said that the Republicans have an enormous cash advantage. I'm talking about like hundreds of millions of dollars in a cash advantage headed into the midterms. And, you know, the midterms right now, the conventional wisdom is that the Republicans are probably going to take a shellacking, right? For a lot of reasons we've talked about. But when I saw this story, I couldn't help but ask myself, and let me ask you this question: is it possible that Republicans can buy their way out of a bad election, or at least partially buy their way or mitigate the effects of a bad election by just having this much more money to run ads and all the rest?
So there's only two kinds of money in a campaign: enough and not enough. You don't get any bonus points for having twice as much as you needed. You either have enough money to basically fight it to a draw, and when you get the money matters. Early money matters much better than late money. When can you buy the ad inventory? When can you hire the people? Having the money sooner makes a big difference. And if you don't have enough money, but in these Senate races, of course, every competitive Senate race, everybody's going to have enough money. Now, the interesting thing is, so you have the MAGA money that creates what is it? $300 million dollars.
That MAGA pack.
Of the Republicans' advantage over Democrats to this point. Now, the good news for Democrats there is very little of that money will end up in races. Some of it will end up in races, but the MAGA fundraising space it is not money that if you look at the graphic, you have the bright red and then you have the pink.
Yeah.
And most of that pink will be water on a rock, right? Because it will go in and not go directly to the races. If you want to help your candidate, you want it to go into the race. You want it to be because they can get better ad rates. They can do all this other stuff. You want to fund the candidate directly. The MAGA fundraising universe has a very high burn rate and a low deliverable.
But there's a bunch of other. It's not just
right. But that's what I was going to say.
There's other buckets of money that are way.
I don't know if we're allowed to show. I don't know. New York Times. This is my version of a call for.
That's a big difference right there. That's like a fourfold difference.
So if you look at the red, the actual red, the real number, that's twice as much as the real Democratic number. So even if 90% of the MAGA money evaporates, that's still real money for Republicans, and they're it's twice as much as Democrats. And for Democrats, Mark Leibovich has a wonderful piece in the Atlantic.
I read it.
Where he basically looks at the Democratic Party and says, "Wow, you stink! You stink at this."
But you know what? I'm just going to push back a little bit on good old Mark, and we all love Mark, right? But basically, what I got from that very, very long piece was that basically he was saying, Democrats. He was quoting a lot of Democrats saying, Democrats need to learn to fight like Republicans. Right. They're ruthless and Democrats. And I'll be honest with you, I hear the same thing from Republicans. I literally heard this week.
Go ahead.
Pardon me?
No,
I heard somebody this week saying much the same thing as like Republicans. They need to get nasty like the Democrats. Now, I will say this in a broad historical sense. I have heard over many, many years, and I've been doing this for decades, a lot more Republicans complaining about how this is pre-Trump.
Yeah,
that they were playing by the what were the rules? The Marquis, the
Marquis, the Queensbury, the Marquis,
the Queensbury
rules.
And that was famously applied to George H.W. Bush, by the way, back in the day, and that the Democrats were ruthless and they would do anything to win. And I think there was some truth to that in a general sense. But then in the era of Trump, it's hard to sort of make that argument, right? Because Trump is nothing if not ruthlessly single-minded in what he wants to do. I think they both do it. Is basically what I'm saying.
The comfortable words, if we were to use ecclesiastical language, we would say the comfortable words when your party loses an election is that the reason you lost the election is because you are not as rotten as the other people. This is what both parties tell themselves after they lose an election. We would have won if the other bastards were not so evil. And we need to lower our standards of conduct and behavior in order to match not the actual conduct of the other side, but the supposed, alleged conduct of the other
only
side.
We were more rotten, we would win more elections.
Yeah, exactly. And at the core of, for example, Republican allegations of massive voter fraud is to use a terrible term of our time, a permission structure to do crazy stuff around elections, right? Yeah. It's a ratchet, it's a race to the bottom, and both parties do it. So the part of Leibovich, and this in another episode we'll get to talk more about Gavin Newsom, but what Democrats are telling Leibovich in that piece is we should be more rotten, right? We look at Gavin Newsom. By the way, did you see Gavin Newsom's wife grab the microphone and go on a rant lecturing reporters about they don't care enough about abortion rights? And I was like, uh-oh.
Wow.
The first
Wow.
lady of California is a potential liability. Put it on the list. And of course, it was received as like, yes, she's speaking truth to power. And I'm like, that is not what you're looking for. If you want to run for president, that's not a helpful setting. But anyway, the Gavin Newsom and other people, we're going to cuss more. We're going to act like Trump online. We're going to be rotten. We're going to be mean. We're going to punch him in the face. I saw the quote from Newsom the other day, which was, this is a couple weeks ago, which is, given the choice between wrong and strong and right and weak, people will always choose wrong and strong.
Yeah.
Well, how about right and strong? Could you do that?
Yeah.
What,
it's not a binary choice. You could,
Is that available? So there's that part of what Democrats are telling Mark Leibovich. What Mark Leibovich is telling Democrats in that piece is, if you have a revolt at the DNC over return to work, if you must do land acknowledgments at the beginning of your sessions, if you are so held hostage by the groups
part
and just by every little constituent group that has
You're never going to win.
veto, you can't win.
You
don't have the structure. There is no Republican Party right now. There is no national Republican Party right now. It is whatever Donald Trump says that it is. And that's,
by the way, and there was another thing in there, and I know this is a bugaboo of mine, but there was something in the article to the effect that some Democrat were saying, we've got to stop talking about, like, biological men and women's sports. That's not what people want to. That's still not an answer to that tricky question.
That's
I mean, the response of, we need to stop talking about something, is not a way to figure out what the politically good answer is. That is not an answer at all, and that will come back to haunt them.
A Democrat of political acumen, of great political acumen, would look at the Republican Party today and say, "Oh, you have the snowflake problem now. You have it. Your people are fragile. You get freaked out about stuff. You're triggered all the time. How do we exploit that?" But Democrats will not be able to exploit the right-wing snowflakeism and the woke right that is so, like, just if we think about the stuff around Turning Point USA, we think about lionizing Kid Rock, like the right has a serious triggered problem right now. If Democrats want to exploit that, which they should, they will have to be able to say, as Ken Martin, the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, said to the people who were like, "Boo, you can't make us return to work," which is, well, if you don't want to come back to the office, good luck.
I'll help you find a job elsewhere.
We'll help you find a job elsewhere.
Yeah.
They have to be able to say on trans issues, they have to say it's okay to say that sports, that children's sports, right? High school sports, college sports are accepted. You could, sorry, no, can't do it. And they have to be able to say these things succinctly and clearly,
so that they can go after Republicans on their vulnerabilities
to end it. I will shut up by saying, the principal challenge that faces Democrats as they go into 2028 is not, can they raise enough money? It's not, can they find an attractive candidate? It's not all of these things. It is, will the Democratic base allow them to win? And the Democratic base feels burned.
That's a great point.
Rightly so. By Joe Biden, who gave them the business. He deceived. He was a disaster. They made a compromise. They accepted Joe Biden, and it was a disaster. And then they said, and now you're going to take Kamala Harris. You're going to take it. We're not going to have primaries, and you're going to take it. And they were like, okay, that's fine. And
great.
She lost.
It'll be super.
And she lost. So the question now is, and this is where the Republican primary comes into all of this, which is, will Democrats be sufficiently scared of a Republican victory to act right? Will they be scared enough to say, we got it, when somebody says we're not doing the land acknowledgments anymore, that they will say, okay, I accept, because if we keep doing it,
someone has to be
we're going to lose if we keep doing it.
Yeah.
And this is the JD Vance problem. And the JD Vance problem is, Democrats do not take him seriously. Democrats look at J.D. Vance, they see the meme, they think that he's ridiculous, and they're not afraid of him the way that they were afraid of Donald Trump. And so as this Democratic field takes shape and as Democrats figure out who they are and how they're going to win, how willing they are to grow up.
Yeah. Well, the fact that they're not afraid of him might embolden them to pick someone that's more of a on the Jasmine Crockett side of the scale, which could cause a problem for them in the general.
That's how you get the AOC JD Vance election.
Oh, I'd be all about that. Chris,
you would be one of very few people in America who would say the same thing. But yes, as a coverage project, yes.
Before we go, I just want to point out to people that Chris is not only the author of the Whole Hog Politics, but also, Chris, you host the wonderful Sunday morning political talk show called The Hill Sunday, which airs 10 a.m. Eastern every Sunday, and it is fantastic. Chris, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today, but we would look forward to seeing you and everyone. And by the way, next week, we are going to get back to taking live audience questions, so make sure to dial in live on thehill.com next week at 9 a.m., and you can stream this very podcast, and you can join this very podcast by asking Chris or I a question or several questions, and we look forward to that. So until next time, I'm Bill Sammon, joined by my old pal Chris Stirewalt. We will see you on the next episode of Whole Hog Politics.